Anybody?
I can go, Patniji.
Thank you so much.
Shuklam Bharadaram Vishnum Shashivarnam Chaturbhujam Prasannavadhanam Dhyayet Sarvavighnopashantaye Yashadviradavakthradhya Parishadhya Parashatam Vignam Nignanti Satatam Vishwakshenam Tamashraye Asmat Sri Gurubhyo Namaha Asmat Sri Paramagurubhyo Namaha Asmat Sri Sarvagurubhyo Namaha Om Shri Ganeshaya Namaha Om Shri Saraswatyai Namaha.
Lovely. Thank you very much. So let's start in the format of any questions first. I think we'll finish module 1 today because I don't think we've got too many slides. So we can take some time to answer questions, or if you wish, then we can end a bit earlier so that you can have time to think about your assignment. Either way, it's okay with me, whatever you prefer. But let's start with the questions anyway. No questions?
I'll hold off if anybody else has a question, but I thought I'll begin with an observation, more
Yes.
like my thought. As someone who's coming into this not knowing a word, not knowing anything at all about psychology in general, what I know is what I learned from the Vedanta angle, these classes.
Yeah.
So what makes most sense to me, particularly when contrasting the Western and Indian psychology, would be easiest to understand if I apply it using the Panchamahakoshas.
That's right.
So I was just writing this down. So if it is, you have the Anandamaya Kosha, Vijnana, Manomaya, Pranamaya, Annamaya, and it seems like we know the importance of Anandamaya Kosha, which is fundamentally seems right. But it seems like Western philosophy, Western psychology focuses on part of Pranamaya and Annamaya. Is that right? I would like your analysis of that.
Just give me 1 minute. I need to fix this. The internet connection somehow is. Okay, so you were asking about the Panchakosha, and I think uh, the idea is that Western psychology kind of focuses on some aspects of the Panchakosha, but not everything. Is that what you're saying? What is your background, if I may ask, Nandaji?
Pharmaceutics. So I know about the drug part of it, and I know how bad they are.
Okay. So yes, I mean, if we think about the Panchakosha, right? So we got the Annamaya Kosha, which is the gross physical part. Then we got the Pranamaya Kosha, which is really the five pranas, Vyana, Apana, Udana, Samana, and which is the fifth one. So those five pranas are actually the forces in the body which function according to the systems of the body. So you got circulatory system, you got the various different system, ejection out of the body, intake into the body, all these kind of movements which are taking place is what the prana control, because prana is about movement. So, to a certain extent, it also kind of talks about, the movement in the body in that way. Yeah, that's right. Prana, Apana, Vyana, Udana, and Samana. I've forgotten the Samana. So in that way, it is talking about the pranas, but it talks about in a different kind of conceptual framework. It talks about, the circulatory system and so on. But if you think about Udana Prana, for example, it also talks about the movement in the mind. So that some of the thoughts are kind of coming up, creative thoughts, for example, are connected with Udana Prana. Now that, Western psychology doesn't talk about the systems of, working in that way. So the physiological systems are what they actually talk about, and the physical system which are related to the physiological system, they focus mainly on that. So there is some parallel between, the concept of pranamaya and the concept of all these systems in the body. The what you call the body also, it is made up of food because it's called Annamaya Kosha. Okay. Now, if we look at it from the Ayurvedic point of view, which I'm going to talk about in the third module, the Ayurveda talks about Prakriti. Prakriti is the one which gives rise to the body. Now, the body is made up of the 5 elements, the Pancha Mahabhuta, okay, which is earth and air, etc. Now, if we look at that particular conceptualization, it takes us in a different pathway, thinking about the body. Then we are thinking about, okay, the combination, for example, of, Prithvi and Apa is equal to the Kapha dosha. Now, Kapha dosha then is related to the functioning of the body in a particular way. The second thing which Ayurveda talks about is that the Prakriti, which is my body, is the same as the Prakriti of the whole cosmos. You see what I mean? Now, that may not be any difference because, even the Western kind of systems of thought are talking about, yes, this body is made out of gross matter, but the connection with the 5 elements is not there. So again, there is a difference in terms of even understanding the body. So we got to, the Annamaya Kosha, we talked about the Pranamaya Kosha, then we are talking about the Manomaya Kosha. Now, according to, various different ways of thinking about it, but Manomaya Kosha, according to the Vedantic way of thinking, is the seat of emotion. Okay, so when we talk about the emotions and the experience of emotion and the expression of the emotion and the kind of regulation in between, then this is what Western psychology will talk about, that there is a kind of regulatory systems within the emotional dimension of the human being. Now, in terms of the Manomaya Kosha, there is again a different kind of understanding of what Manomaya Kosha is. So Manomaya Kosha sometimes is taken as the 6th sense. 6th sense, in the sense that it is connected to the 5 senses which are brought together in the Manomaya Kosha, and then they are kind of constructing that particular view of the world presented by the senses, at the same time injecting a kind of emotional attitude to whatever we are seeing. So now the Manomaya Kosha becomes slightly different because then it is connected to the perception as well, besides the kind of constructing of that experience within the mind. And then the connection with that to the Vijnanamaya Kosha is then how this particular experience is being evaluated by the intellect. So there will be a difference here because then, yes, there is, in terms of Western psychology, it also talks about, the relationship between emotion and cognitive control, for example. So that also becomes, something similar, but again, the concept is different. And then the Vijnanamaya Kosha is the one which is related to the cognitive functions, reasoning, rationality, etc. Now, again, Western psychology talks about it in terms of the brain and the kind of way in which the brain circuits are functioning in order to make that cognitive function to function. Okay. Now, there's a big difference here because then the connection between Vijnanamaya and the Anandamaya Kosha is that the Anandamaya Kosha, which is a repository of the Vasanas, will then influence the Vijnanamaya Kosha as to how it is evaluating anything. Now, we can see some parallels. For example, if we go to psychoanalysis, it talks about the unconscious mind, which is then constantly kind of affecting what is happening in the conscious mind. So there is some kind of connection between that as well. But what I'm saying is that we can differentiate the Panchakosha model and the Western model of the body and the mind by looking at each kosha and seeing what is the structure or what is the concept of each of the koshas and see where the differences are. I've given you some kind of understanding of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it is because of that Western psychology seems too simplistic.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That was the feeling I came away with.
Yeah. So in one way, it is simplistic. On the other hand, what happens is that they've got a huge amount of complexity in terms of understanding the brain.
The physical
brain. Okay? They have got enormous kind of consideration of the brain, and there is a lot of kind of thinking which has gone into the structure of the brain, the different regions of the brain, the interconnection between them, and what each region kind of represents in terms of the function, etc., etc. Whereas that kind of reductionist way of looking at the mind in that kind of way, including consciousness, they've gotten into the depth of that. But then something is lost in the process. This kind of holistic thinking about, well, you are talking about the brain. We know it is connected to the body. It is connected in various different ways. But there are layers which, Indian psychology talks about, which may be missing in emphasis in terms of what, Western psychology is talking about. So, there are nuances in terms of understanding that. So what I'm saying is that, we can't sharply say body is Annamaya Kosha, because again, there is a difference in terms of understanding that as well.
Understood.
Yeah. Good. Okay. We got Nishit, and then we got Ashokji.
Hari Om, Ramesh, having a little problem with my video camera, so please, Jyoti and I are here. Just to add to that discussion with Nanda ji brought up, it would seem to me that, we in the Hindu philosophy have this whole concept of vasanas, right? And that obviously is related to previous births and all that. So maybe that's a difference, that the Western psychology doesn't focus that, hey, something from a previous birth, that whole concept.
That's right.
Unless it might not be there, because they're talking about the person in this lifetime, and there's no element of something else. I don't know if I'm correct, grasping that.
Yes. I did mention when we are talking about the idea of the conditioning. So what we were talking about is vasanas is equal to conditioning. Now, if you think about that conditioning in terms of Western psychology, it comes from the nurturing part of the nature and the nurture. Okay, so that nurturing part belongs to only this life, because as far as Western psychology is concerned, this is the only life. You've got only one life.
Right.
It comes into you. So existential talk about it in this manner. They say you come out of nothingness and move towards mortality.
Got it. Okay.
So now again, so as far as the vasana is concerned, the big difference is that conditioning is coming from all of our previous lives, and therefore it is not just about nurturing in this life, but the nurturing which has taken place in all the lives. Okay, so and it's interesting that that concept of, okay, if I was a dog in my 1 millionth life before I came here. Now, where is that dog vasana, which is now already conditioning is there, but I don't experience any of that at the moment. So that question Patanjali actually asks in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. And the explanation he gives is that the connection between karma and vasana is also there. So if at the moment my karma is to be a human being, then those kind of conditioning kind of are going into the background. Most of 99.9% of the time they are in the background. It is only that 0.01% when it might jump into the moment and make me, bark like a dog, which probably might not happen, but I may behave like a buffalo. Gurudev used to say, there are many buffaloes sitting here in the audience. So, which means that some of the kind of broader aspects of our previous lives may kind of exist in terms of the conditioning, and also that whatever vasana we bring are also shaped by the attributes of the vasanas, which are the gunas. So when my tamasic guna is now right at the forefront, this is now the buffalo who wants to go to sleep. Okay.
Right.
Okay. So that is one thing. We are talking about the vasana. Let me talk about now the karma. Now, again, a fundamental difference between Western psychology, Indian psychology. Now, what Indian psychology says is that you have got a steadily unfolding process which is not coming from nothingness, and it is not moving towards mortality, but it continues after mortality. You see what I mean? So now karma is also part and parcel of the thinking about, well, what is actually being experienced by me in this moment is not simply because I've been thrown into this existence, not even knowing where I'm going. I've come out of nothingness, being thrown into the world with a ready-made kind of reality which everybody is buying into, and then I also start buying into it. Whereas Indian psychology says, no, you have been thrown here not out of nothingness, but because you are now having that storehouse of karma out of which this particular set of karmas have fructified for you, and therefore you brought that into this life, and this is your life now kind of steadily unfolding itself. So can you see the difference?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, we can see that as we start digging a bit deeper, we can see these fundamental differences arising in the conceptualization of the Western ideas of the mind and the body and everything else.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Ashok, you?
Hari Om,
Hari Om.
Ramesh. So
Hari Om.
it seems to me, again, the Eastern philosophical mind is the art, the humanness, of people. The Western philosophy is more scientific. So if you're looking between art and science, that we are trying to get at the same thing, but one is going from you are an existential person, why are you existing, and then start working the art form. While the other place you're coming from the top and saying, hey, what is verifiable, what is scientific, what can be actually defend, and so we are coming. So it's sort of trying to converge, but we are looking at two sides of the same coin. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, it is a fair statement in a way, because then let's go back to what we started talking about right at the beginning of the course in terms of ontology epistemology, because that is a good framework of thinking about where these differences are coming from. So ontology is the philosophy of what exists and what is taken as real and what is taken as the truth. Okay, so now if I ask you now, Ashok, you believe in God. Do you believe in God? Yes, I believe in God. And is that God real for you? Yes, it is real for me. And is God exist for you? Yes, God exists for me. Now that reality is your ontology, because you are affirming that there is a certain existence which I affirm as existing, and it is real for me. Okay. Now, if you take anybody else, take an agnostic. Well, I don't know whether God exists or not. Or you take an atheist who says God does not exist. Now you can see that belief systems are going to be different in terms of how we think about a single concept. Okay? And therefore either it is going to be in the belief system, or it is going to be rejected simply because there is no evidence for it. You see what I mean? So when you talk about, somebody has got their microphone. Poonam. So, when we talk about what you said is the Western kind of understanding through the scientific method of the hypothetical deductive method, which means empiricism. I see something, I observe something, I keep on observing something, I categorize something, and then from there a kind of theoretical formulation begins to happen, and then I use that as a basis of understanding whether I can validate any of these statements which the theory is, I can deduce from the theory. Yes? So this is where the top-down kind of process is taking place. This is a scientific method, right? And we are all familiar with that. Now, the other is the bottom-up approach, whereby I start from my own experience and say to myself, well, what is it that I'm experiencing? And how am I experiencing? And how can I understand that experience? Now, this is where the rishis actually began to do this very kind of intense introspection about how the mind works, what are the kind of constituents or the components of the mind, how is it connected to perception, what are the pramans, how can I think about the different pramans, and so on and so on. Now this in combination with the Vedic scriptures, which are the revelations. So again we see there is an emphasis on personal experience rather than an objective observation. Can you see this fundamental difference? Right? So that objective kind of reality, which is coming through science and scientific observation, is different from deriving knowledge from the subjective experience and the revelation of the scriptures. Okay? That's why, then these two things begin to kind of go in different direction. Why? Because you are only accepting what you can see and observe and test. I am kind of thinking about, okay, there are things which I can't see, but I believe in because the scriptures are validated knowledge, and therefore that validated knowledge becomes the basis of my understanding, my own kind of framework of thinking. And therefore I will admit that there is a kind of supernatural reality, there is a transcendental reality, and there are people who have validated the transcendental reality through their own subjective experience. So this is how then the differences can be seen also. But in a sense, you're right that it is a top-down, bottom-up difference in approach as to how we understand anything.
If I can ask a follow-up question. Now, as a chaplain, we are talking about the approach of there is a scripture, there's a belief system. So we are providing support there. But there is also, what you're saying is these are two different approaches, they're two different paths, but they can coexist, because we may say, hey, we will provide something, but you still don't need to go see a therapist and take therapy. So it's not mutually exclusive, but these are two different things.
Yeah. Coexistence is a fact of life, right? So in the US, you're going to have elections in 1 month time. Now, all the different ideologies are coexisting together, and they're each fighting with each other, saying, no, this is a perfect ideology, and therefore I'm going to vote for this person or that person. So this idea of coexistence is a common kind of human experience. The only thing is that within those kind of ideologies and different philosophical systems and different ways of thinking, is there some common ground which we can agree on at least, right? So what the Indian scriptures are saying, yes, there is a common ground, and that common ground is human experience. That is the fundamental common ground for all of us. What we do with that experience is completely going to be depending on you. Whether you buy into the democratic ideology or whether you buy into the communist ideology, that particular experience will take you in different pathways in different directions. So it's up to you. And the choice which you make is sometimes, the way in which that past conditioning is bringing you to this point of making that choice, whatever it is. So yes, there is, the coexistence is there. Maybe there is a kind of common ground we can think about, but there are differences, much more differences than commonalities between some of these systems of thought. Is that okay? Good. Okay.
Thank you.
Param? Yeah. Param?
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Towards the end of last month's class, or last week's class, there was this discussion about the Western psychology, where it was mentioned that Western psychology is about maintaining normality, whereas the Indian psychology is about seeking to transcend it. So just sort of, can you be a bit more explain on this, especially on the fact that, seeking to transcend in Indian psychology? I understand, but in practical, how many people can actually achieve it? I mean, yes, it's nice to say, yes, it's to transcend it, but in terms of practicality, how easy it is? I mean, maybe there's Gurudev and a few other examples, but you don't have that much out there.
No, I understand. So what, this is one way of thinking about it, okay, is that number one, what do we actually mean by normal? Okay, so normalcy in terms of human functioning and functioning of the mind, the Western idea is that, there is some kind of normality in terms of cognitive function, there is some kind of normality according to the emotional function, behavioral function, etc. So what is considered as normal and what is considered as abnormal is clearly defined, for example, in the DSM catalog. Okay, so now there is a psychological kind of categorization of abnormality according to that way of thinking. So what is considered normal now was not considered normal maybe 100 years ago. Okay, so now there is also that evolving idea about what is normal. Now, from the Indian psychological point of view, what is normal? So if we think about what Indian psychology calls as normal, is that the normal functioning of the human being is dependent on the play of the gunas both in the body and the mind. Okay, now there is a kind of connection between Western way of thinking about the normalcy and returning to the normal, whereas what Indian psychology is saying, the normal state is the agitated state. It's not the kind of peaceful state. Okay, so where Rajas and Tamas is considered to be normal, then the transcendence comes through having Sattva guna as your predominant guna. Okay, can you see the difference now? So that Western psychology talks about agitation as an abnormal state. And it talks about some kind of normalcy which is related to, inner stability, cognitive flexibility, emotional regulation. So there is a kind of connection there as well, in the sense that, when we talk about the Sattva guna being the normal state, then not normal, but a sense of a higher level of functioning of the human being, then that is taking us along the pathway of moksha. Why is that? Okay. It's because in the state of ignorance, which is said to be normal, in the state of agitation of Rajas and Tamas, which is said to be normal. So what is saying, if you are in those states of the mind, then what will happen is that you will begin to So now, the dysfunctionality which is coming from Western psychology is to be understood as here's the normal, you've kind of gone beyond the normal, and therefore you have to be brought back to the normal. And therefore, if you're feeling depressed, take a pill and you come back to normal. Whereas here, the kind of normal is the way in which you're going to be continuously suffering. Okay, suffering is seen as abnormality in Western psychology, and suffering is seen the normality in Indian psychology. Now, in order to get away from this, state of suffering and ignorance, you have to now go along the path of moksha. Now, in that pathway, the stages of purification begin to become important. So purification will lead to slowly by slowly getting away from the rajas and the tamas guna to develop more emphasis on the sattva guna, and therefore then that becomes the pathway towards moksha. The second question you asked is that not an impossible thing? It is an impossible thing to achieve moksha, but it is not impossible to achieve sattvic mind. It is perfectly possible for anybody to reach that state of sattvic state of personality of the mind, etc. And that is enough for you to relieve yourself of all the suffering in this life. 90% of your suffering will disappear because now the sattva guna is now the predominant guna in your life. If you want to remove the suffering of coming back to life again, then that can only be solved by the transcendental consciousness.
Okay.
Okay, so transcendental consciousness is not going to be available to 1 in 100 million. But
Okay.
for that 99 point whatever number of people can strive towards a transcendental, reach a very high state of sattva, and then relieve themselves of suffering. And this we see in the lives of masters. They are so calm and peaceful, and their clarity in the head, purity in the heart, and charity in the action, what Gurudev says, right? And that is a state of sattva. And that is the relief from suffering.
Okay. Just let me paraphrase my understanding so that just want to be sure I'm aligned. So what I'm hearing from you is, in Western psychology, suffering is seen as abnormal, and they say by taking medicines you will come back to the normal stage. Whereas in Indian psychology, suffering itself is seen normal because of our belief in birth and vasanas and gunas, etc. And for us to move away from suffering is to take the path of understanding the scriptures, or that understanding who am I by, and based on that you get the sattva guna, and having a sattvic way of life would help us in that direction. That's something which we can achieve.
That's it. Perfect. Yes, that's the right understanding. But
Thank
does it
you.
make sense? Does it make sense?
It makes sense, but again, the question now to go back and say, okay, if somebody is suffering from depression, and tell them, don't worry, that's normal, would be something which I'll get thrown out. So
yeah. But suffering from depression is is the human condition. You can put it like that.
Yeah.
It's not
Understood.
normal.
Yeah.
Right. So that if you are human, you are bound to have depression 4 times in your whole lifetime. Established fact. Okay. So one way or the other, whether it is severe depression or even less intensity of depression, people are going to suffer from depression one time or the other. Yeah. So that is a fact of life. What it means is that we don't have to say, this is normal. Forget about everything, because if this is normal, grin and bear it. That is not the point. What scriptures are saying, in fact, you can do something about it, and what you can do is do your sadhana. And that sadhana will then take you to a different level of functioning, which is a sattvic way of functioning, and therefore you will be able to relieve yourself of the suffering.
Yeah, and not only that, sadhana will also allow you to look at suffering from a different perspective.
Different, yeah.
Makes you understand better. Yes. That's where the relief comes in from.
Yes, absolutely. And this is what I mentioned, I think, before, maybe in this class or not, is that pain doesn't have to be suffering. Yep. Pain doesn't have to be suffering, because there is a differentiation between the pain in the body and even in the mind. And the suffering comes out of the perception of pain.
Yeah.
And if that perception starts changing, because we are understanding that in a different way and understanding ourselves as beyond this kind of activities going on in the body, mind, intellect, then we can see that we can kind of step away from it.
Yeah, I think it was in this class somewhere. I've known pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional.
That's right, absolutely. Suffering is a choice.
Suffering is a choice. Okay. Thank you, Hari Om.
Okay, Hari Om. Okay, Nishan?
I just wanted to make one comment back to Ashokji's point.
Yeah.
And I'm just sharing an experience. So I have volunteered and just gotten accepted with an organization as a volunteer to help
Good.
for spiritual care. The context is that the first thing they're having me do is to call families that within the last 2 months have had a death. Okay, so there's been some kind of a death. And so the organization has been involved, but they want someone to check in, etc. So it's very basic. It's, I'm not being a psychiatrist. However, my observation as I went through the tips and training by someone who was, American, there was no discussion on what my religion is or their religion is. I am telling you, 75% of what she told me is what we learned the first semester with you and Madhuji and Hemaji.
Yes.
Attentive listening, being a peaceful silence thing. So my point is that it's great that we go through the academics of all of this Western versus Eastern. But my observation yesterday, and I was very happy that I've gone through this course because I got exactly what she was training me on, basic training. I'm just saying that it was very, very, very overlapping with what we learned when we did our role plays. I just wanted to make that observation.
No.
And it was totally in a Western context.
Yeah, it is in the Western context, but we've got models of actually the same thing. So I mentioned to you about the Advaita Vedanta model of Shravanam, Mananam, Nididhyasanam. Okay, so Shravanam means proactive listening. Mananam means conscious reflection. Nididhyasanam, put it into practice. Okay, so when we talk about this, from the Western point of view, these are counseling, therapeutic skills in terms of any relationship. Actually, that model exists in a beautiful way in the Indian scriptures as well. But it is in relationship to self-development, self-care, and spiritual growth. So, although, this fundamental kind of practices and skills which all of us need to learn in order to do counseling or spiritual care, if we have been following Advaita Vedanta in Chinmay Mission, this will come naturally to you. 100% guaranteed. If you've been, going to Chinmay Mission classes or running the classes, you will see this is a natural development of attending these classes or taking these classes.
Thank you. Yeah, and one more thing I'll add. They say the don'ts, they say what you should do and what you should not do. One of them was to say, I understand what you're going through, or to say, here's why you're feeling what you're feeling. Those were given as tips of not, because each person is a different person.
That's right.
So we have to be conscious not to say, hey, because I know so much about Vedanta, that I'm going to try to give them some explanation.
Absolutely. And some of this practice involves taking a step back, not only from my own preconceived idea about what is happening, but also to make some kind of causal connection with the experience of the patient. So in other words, I have emphasized this again and again. It is very person-centric approach, right? And that means that the person is the most important element in the whole conversation. So I don't start with myself. I think, I know, I can explain. No, you tell me how do you explain this experience and what do you think about this experience? Tell me a bit more detail about this grief which you are feeling at the moment. Let's talk about that grief and so on and so on. So it is the person who becomes the most important. I need to listen carefully. I need to respond in a very respectful way with the right kind of response. And most of it is about mirroring back to what the patient is talking about.
Yeah, and that was so much like what you said was so much in parallel. So that's why I wanted to bring up the point, because I personally experienced it yesterday. Thank you very much.
Oh, fantastic. It's a good start for you, Nishat. Very good. Okay, so we got Vishal.
Hari Om Patiji. Yeah, just in the same segue what I think Nishaji mentioning, in terms of the the Western versus Indian. So as I think towards the end, I think you mentioned the Maslow hierarchy.
Yes.
So that pyramid, we have from the
That's
basic
right.
needs to the self-actualization and
That's right.
self-realization,
Yeah.
So isn't it a perspective, just thinking, perhaps I may be wrong, in terms of, but because I think its Western side is because, the lower part of pyramid is mostly, attained, as an individual or as a societal perspective. So the more it is more from the psychological perspective, and even in India also, those who can able to met that, uh, but still in terms of the spiritual care, if we see in terms of uh, the reach, I think it is more and I think as we were talking about in terms of suffering, there are different suffering. Like if we contextualize from the Indian perspective, more from the the current state where we are, where we are still struggling with some basic needs, from the societal perspective, and Western, because I think it is more of basics are achieved, so definitely there are contrasts, but I believe those are also the thing, I believe, in terms of keeping that in mind, like when we keep the spiritual care, I believe, I don't know, but just thought from that perspective as well.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, some of those ideas which you mentioned, I would tend to agree with that. But I think there is another fundamental difference here. Let me explain. So from the Western psychology, okay, you can't go and start going up the pyramid unless you've solved the fundamental aspect of survival. The survival needs you need to take care of before you start thinking about relationship, before you start thinking about love, before you start thinking about integration in society and so on, right up to self-actualization. The Indian approach is different. What Indian approach says, your condition in life is not necessarily going to stop you from coming into a relationship with your pain and suffering. You see the difference. This is again a very big difference. So that even a person who is on the poverty line or below can still practice spirituality without saying, okay, this is really going to limit me. Yes, it is going to limit you to a certain extent, but also that it is possible for that person to exercise their spiritual connection and still keep on rising. You see what I mean? Whereas Western psychology, okay, you are going to be too preoccupied. Don't even bother thinking about this. Don't even bother about self-actualization because you are still at the level of survival needs. Okay, and there is a living testament. I see it all the time in India here. People who are so kind of oriented towards religion and spirituality, and they hardly have anything on themselves even. So, in other words, that the solution to kind of, suffering, according to Maslow, there is a different orientation of what Maslow is talking about. Whereas our orientation is different. Why? Because we are talking about this spiritual orientation, which can come in any dimension, in any condition, in any circumstance of your life. Okay? Of course, we are not saying that that is the ultimate solution and there is not going to be any kind of pushback from your living condition. But what Vedanta says, that every challenge is an opportunity for you to develop yourself and move within your prakriti more towards the sattvic guna. So again, there is a kind of difference in terms of that thinking as well. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Bharani. Yeah, I was just thinking because I think somehow I don't know, as you mentioned, the spirituality from the Indian psychology perspective, can be applied, from any strata, from the economic background. It doesn't matter whether you are, but because I think it is because of the perspective, I think it is taken for granted, and people just move away from getting more materialist, or at least get material prosperity, and then they just more focus on to the spirituality, and then we lose the science perhaps. in that.
Yeah, and that's the point, is that, you know, Western psychology develops in a different way than Indian psychology has developed. And I think I mentioned this, is that the Western psychology is very much individualistic. And when it is individualistic, one of the consequence of that is that everybody is for themselves. You are the person responsible for whoever you are and whatever you do, which is fine. Whereas in the Indian psychology, we are more towards the collectivist way of thinking. Okay. Now, when you think about Maslow's, pyramid, it is talking about self-actualization, which means what? You as an individual, you need to actualize yourself, which means what? You are the person with all the skills and talents and whatever you have got. You should actualize that, talent or skill and reach that state of self-actualization, because you as an individual are the most important person in the world, and it's up to you. Okay. Now, can you see the underlying philosophy which is giving rise to this Maslow's pyramid? And therefore, if we think about, well, then what is Indian psychology talking about? It is talking about satsang, for example. Okay, what is satsang? People coming together to support each other in terms of their own development and the development of the whole group. Very interesting. So, some of these underlying, ontologies and epistemologies of Indian and Western psychologies will lead to some of these kind of consequences of thinking. So we need to be careful even what we are comparing, and, where is this kind of thought and idea coming from, and where are we talking about where our ideas and thoughts are coming from. It will give us two different pictures altogether. Okay.
Yeah, Hari Om Patiji. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Seema?
Sorry, I was muted. I don't know if this is the right place to bring this up, but it was something that's kind of, I shouldn't say disturbed me, but a little bit that I need to look into it. So I'm doing my CPE at the hospital. So basically I'm starting my clinical pastoral education. And I was put in a situation yesterday, which I should be in. I went in to see a patient with my mentor, and she said, "Why don't you say the prayer?" So I brought the connectiveness of, God is in your heart. This patient could not speak. And afterwards we found out she was Baptist. We didn't know at the time that when we went in. And
Right.
So my mentor said, well, we probably should have ended it with, in Jesus Christ's name, amen. And that just rubbed something in me. And I know we are there for the patient. I know we're there for them. I've grown up here, so it's not like this is very foreign to me. But just saying those words, thinking about saying those words kind of agitated something in me. And
Okay.
I would like to have your take on that, because I know this is going to be the case always, because
Yeah, it is
90% of the
come.
patients are Christian. So
Yes.
I need to find out some
Yes,
advice that
yes.
you have for me, because I really need some
Okay.
advice.
Okay, so tell me, what was your experience of being uncomfortable with that?
I think just thinking that Jesus Christ is a savior, and it's only if we accept him that we're going to go to heaven. Now, I know that's my bias in it, I think. And maybe I should just in my mind say Krishna and say Jesus out loud. I don't know. No. Maybe that's something I need to do.
Yeah, well, that is definitely one solution. But here's a real kind of skill which you need to develop. Okay, because you're going to come across all kinds of patients, even a Buddhist or a Jain or any of the Western kind of Christian denomination, and each will have a different kind of take on what needs to be said and how it needs to be said. So what is a preparation for you and me in terms of spiritual care? The preparation is something, one word. It is called bracketing. Bracketing. Okay, have you heard of that word?
No.
Okay. Bracketing is a special skill, which means that I will bracket out all my thoughts and feelings and everything else at the moment so that I can focus on the need of the patient in front of me. Okay. Now, this skill of bracketing is not easy to do, but you have to practice it again and again and again so that, number one, the patient becomes the most important person you are connecting with at the moment. The person needs are the most important at the moment. It is not my need that I'm getting confused because I'm talking about Jesus and I should be thinking about Krishna. If that comes into my mind, I say to the thought, please come back later. Okay. And then I focus on whatever needs to be done for the patient. I will do it. And then I will go out of the room and just process whatever happened to me and then let go. Okay. Now, this technique is very important for all of you because you will encounter again and again this kind of situation where you are told to do something where the kind of whole system is demanding that you function in a certain way.
Mhm.
Okay. Not only the system is demanding, but the diversity of clients you're going to encounter is also part of that complexity. And therefore, what is the solution? Okay. Bracketing. Bracket out your own thoughts, your preconceived ideas, your own strong opinions, and sometimes strong opinions are very difficult to get rid of in that moment. But this is a skill which I have been taught over the 6 years, and I still kind of, keep on practicing that. And to a certain extent, I can do that in an instant now. Okay, and just focus on the patient. So next time it happens, just try that. Just say to yourself, my thought is not important, my emotion is not important. Let me focus on the patient. Let me give them what they want. Now, for example, if you are saying to the patient, okay, you are having this bad tummy at the moment. I've got some very nice Ayurvedic herb which can help you. Okay, this is not going to work because the system will not allow it. What the system allows is that you refer the pain to the doctor will prescribe to this particular thing, and therefore that is now taken care of. Okay? So in other words, I can't impose my preconceived idea about how this should be treated onto the patient at that moment. The same thing applies to the kind of emotional turmoil which is going on in the patient. And when they require the prayer, what I have to do is, well, let me put my thoughts and my attitudes and my that's why you call the spiritual carer for the patient. And my self-care can come later. Okay. So this is the way in which you need to kind of try and function with every patient.
It's interesting because I look back on my childhood and I remember going to school thinking in my mind, Jai Shri Krishna, Amen. I mean, that's basically what I ended, like whatever we did. In my mind, it was like Krishna, Amen. So
yeah. No, that's fine. That's fine. But I think that bit also needs to kind of
No.
You need to let go. I'll tell you why. Is because when you say that, you are creating a certain tension in your mind.
Okay.
And that tension, you are kind of saying, I'm going to relieve it by saying Krishna. Now, you are putting yourself in a kind of bind, because then it means that every time you have to bring Krishna into the picture. And even if it's in your mind, it will create that slight tension in your mind. Okay? So it's important that we kind of learn what this bracketing is. And if you want, I can kind of take some time another time so that we can talk about it. Or you can ask Madhuji as well in terms of what this means. But I guess
that would be very helpful, because I think many of us are going to be in that situation. We're used to one way, and we are we need to have that skill.
That's right.
That's very helpful. Very helpful.
Okay. So we'll try and fix.
Seemaji, I had the same thing. I started my CPE, actually seeing patients. I went on call on Thursday night, the whole of Friday. I saw a lot of patients, and I had the same question to a lot of people saying prayers. I mean, I guess I had the bracketing, but I also did a few things which may be helpful. One is I said things like Lord's Prayer, and I had a book of Christian prayers which don't necessarily bring in Jesus Christ, but met their needs. Everyone was very happy. I never really mentioned Jesus Christ for this thing, but I gave them a Christian prayer which satisfied them, and they were very happy. So there are ways around it where you can, I believe, at least maybe I'm going to be challenged where we have to start talking about Jesus Christ, but and for that the bracketing will help. But the question is, there are ways around it without compromising anything. I if this helps anyway, because I was in the same situation.
I think Ashurji, one thing is we're in the South. So, you know, when you're in the South, Jesus is right there. So
Agree.
you can't go around it. In the South, you can't go around it. I grew up in the South. I'm in the South. So I think but you know, I think the bracket skills I think are important, and I don't mean to go off topic, but this is
but then again as Ashokji is pointing out, you know, that is not the only solution. There are other solutions, like there is a multi-faith prayer book. I don't know if it exists in USA, but in the UK we have got this multi-faith prayer book, which is kind of secularized in a sense, so that anybody can read that prayer from any religion and still make sense out of it. Okay.
Maybe we should have a side conversation, because my training has been different in CPE. So let's have a side conversation. But
okay, all right, okay. So anyway, this is a good time for a break. Let's have a break for about 15 minutes, and then we come back. Thank you. Okay, so that's a good resource. Is it from the UK Jain Foundation, or is it the US?
It's not public. It's just a PDF in the Jain Foundation website.
Okay. Is it the UK? Because there's a Jain Foundation in UK. I was just wondering.
Possibly. I don't know. Let me check.
No, it's jainfoundation.in. But the book is not from Jain Foundation.
All right, okay.
But the book is not from Jain Foundation. Book is from somebody else.
Or somebody else, yeah. It must be the one I was referring to, because I used to use this book. I haven't seen it, but I guess it might be the same one. Anyway, so you now got resources, okay? Everybody can look at it, and if you need to use it, you know, there's no harm, because, you know, like you're saying that maybe there's nothing you can disagree with, so that's what we need. And if the patient is asking for that, well, that's our job. We are primarily there for the patient, and therefore we should do that. Okay, so kind of resuming where we left off last time, and coming to the kind of summary of main principle of Indian psychology, and before that we are talking about consciousness and mind, and if there are any questions about that, otherwise I can start moving to the next section on summary of the main principles. So it might be just kind of important for you to, you know, remember the 12 points, because many times, you know, people are asked, what is Indian psychology, and what does it involve? So if you have got these points in your mind, is that, you know, there is some way you can explain what Indian psychology is all about. And as we have been talking, you know, the potential for transformation through successive stages and processes of deconditioning the person to a state of freedom and perfection. So that freedom and perfection we are talking about is a state of moksha. And moksha is talked about in many different ways, but, you know, for example, if we talk about nirvana from the Buddhist point of view, kaivalya from the yoga point of view, and so on, then we can begin to understand some of these principles which are going to be important for us to then look at and think about that. So what are these principles? Psychology is a study of the person, or jiva, okay? Now, on the surface, this is a very kind of simple statement. Yes? Simple statement. It's the person, it's the jiva, but jiva is not the person and person is not the jiva. Now you begin to understand how we've been talking about it, is that all the concepts which you think we know and we are used to, those kind of things completely kind of we have to set it aside, because jiva is a very different concept. It's a concept which takes into account a transcendental dimension of the person who is a jiva. And therefore, when anybody asks you, well, you are talking about person, but yes, even Western psychology, talks about the person. Then we have to say, no, but the person is not the same thing in Indian psychology. Jiva concept is different in Indian psychology, and then you can begin to talk about transactional dimension, transcendental dimension, and then talk about the journey from the one to the other. The person is not an isolated, disconnected entity. The jiva is transpersonal and interconnected by transcognitive state. Exactly what I was talking about just now is the transcendental and the transactional. So is not disconnected, right? So again, this has so many implications, because if you're isolated, we talked about it, right? So isolation implies that something is going to go wrong because I feel cut off, I feel isolated, my mental health begins to suffer. But if I truly kind of am convinced and believe with faith that I am not isolated, I'm not disconnected from the totality, then it begins to have a different effect on the mind. So jiva is transactional, but jiva is also transpersonal and interconnected by transcognitive state. Now, what does it mean, transcognitive state? What are we talking about here?
Atma.
Okay, so
Connecting.
Atma, yes, yeah, the Atma is a transpersonal reality, but the transcognitive state is what? In one word, what is it?
Can we
Realization?
call it samadhi?
Moksha.
Samadhi. Moksha is after samadhi, right? So samadhi is this transcognitive state where you go again and again and again to reach that samadhi. And Patanjali talks about the 5 different types of samadhi. So when you reach the highest state of samadhi, then you are in the transcognitive state. Below the nirvikalpa samadhi, there is a sabvikalpa samadhi. So it is a cognitive state. The transcognitive state is only one, nirvikalpa samadhi. And when you ascend to that, sometimes you are drawn back because of the kind of pull of some of the vasanas which are left over. But then when you reach that state of highest purity, then you can remain in that state, and remaining in that state when the vasanas and karmas have completely burnt out, then you remain there. There is no coming back. So this is now how we can explain the jiva. Person is on a journey not from nothingness to mortality, but from something. They came from something and they go to something. And the connection between the jiva in the present reality and the transpersonal reality is through achieving the state of samadhi, which is a deep absorption of the mind in the pure consciousness. So again, this is a principle you can, as you begin to unpack it, you can begin to think about what this each one of these statements principle is talking about. So number 3, the person is consciousness embodied. Anybody explain what this means?
I think that we just spoke about this in Bhagavad Gita, is that we have, the essence of Brahman in this embodiment because of our vasanas and karmas, and so we become the BMI, right?
That's right. Yeah. So in other words, that when we talk about the person is embodied, what is it embodied by? Then we talk about consciousness. So now consciousness is not conscious because nothing can limit the consciousness, right? Because consciousness which is pure consciousness, can never be limited by anything because it is beyond the reach of anything anyway. So what it means is that there is a relationship between this embodied form which I have and that pure consciousness. Where is the connection between the
Reflection.
transactional? Huh? Reflection, that's right. So the reflection is what we are going to reach in the Asmita Samadhi, and then we go to the Nirvikalpa Samadhi, then takes me into the consciousness itself. So some of these things should begin to kind of fit together in your mind. And what we are talking about is embodiment is not of the consciousness. So some people say, okay, you know, this person was alive yesterday, he has gone to today. Now, has the Atma left the body? Has the Atma left the body? No, Atma doesn't leave the body because it was never embodied in that way in the first place. Atma, is still there. If you say that Atman is Brahman, then where is it going to go? It can't go anywhere. Okay? But still, the subtle body, Shukshma Sharira, and the Karana Sharira, which is still under the influence of reflection, that is the one which is departing, not the Atma. Okay? So sometimes in non-technical language, in the common language, we talk about the Atma is left. It is not the Atma which leaves, but rather the two shariras out of the three. One is left behind, then the subtle body plus the causal body, then depart, going to another realm, and then re-embodying itself into another body. But Atma is Atma, it is not getting disturbed by anything. The reflection is then carried away. The reflection of consciousness is carried away. So remember, this consciousness embodied, you have to kind of unpack it and think about, well, you know, consciousness cannot be embodied, talking about here. Okay, so basically we are talking about the reflection. And then consciousness as such, which is pure consciousness, is irreducibly distinct from material objects, including the brain and the mind. It is completely distinct. Okay, so what it means, you cannot reduce it to any of these things which we are talking about. Any aspect of Prakriti cannot limit or reduce pure consciousness. It is beyond any kind of reduction. It is infinite, it is unchangeable, it cannot be limited by time and space causality. So then what are we talking about here is that material objects, brain and mind, are within the ocean of pure consciousness. Think about it like that. Within the ocean of pure consciousness, material object, brain and mind are delimited by the Sharira Traya. And that is what is distinct from the ocean and the object, right? If you put the object inside the ocean, as long as it's not going to melt away, something which is solid is going to just be separate from the ocean, but it's still floating in the ocean. Okay? So, I mean, don't stretch the analogies too far, just a kind of simple explanation of that. The mind is different from consciousness as well as the body, brain, machine. Okay? Anybody tell me what is the difference? Why mind is different from the body in the first place? And why is it different from pure consciousness?
The mind is of subtle nature, whereas the body brain
Yes.
is more gross body.
Good, yeah. And the second part?
And mind is sentient and machine is insentient.
Okay, machine is insentient. Good, okay. Anything else? What about the pure consciousness? How is mind different? What is the relationship again?
The mind is part of the subtle body, but consciousness is more of not linked to this because it's present everywhere. It's different from.
That's right. So in other words, very simply put, consciousness is the source. The mind is the reflector of that light of consciousness. Okay? So therefore, it is different from consciousness, but it is subtle enough to receive the light within its within its realm. Okay? So it's different from the body-mind machine, brain machine, because it's very subtle nature compared to body-mind, but it is not subtle enough for it to merge with that consciousness. So there is a difference between that, and the difference is pure consciousness is the light, and the mind is the reflector of that light.
It's also conscious is the sakshi of the mind. If you go back to the Drigdrishya Vivek concept.
That's right. So it is the final witness.
Yeah.
It is the all-seeing witnessing consciousness. Okay, that is the ultimate sakshi. But in between, there is a transactional sakshi bhava as well, which Patanjali talks about as asmita samadhi, where you can be in that I amness, pure awareness, and observe whatever is going on. But that observer in the transactional reality is also being observed by the pure consciousness. Okay, so the ultimate, drig is Brahman. The relative drig is the witnessing consciousness, awareness in the mind, in the buddhi. And that witnessing buddhi is witnessing the thoughts and the emotions in the intellect and the mind. And the mind is connected to the senses, and the senses are the ones which are the seers of the objects outside. Okay, so this is how we can think about how mind is different. Then, unlike consciousness, the mind is material, albeit subtle. Unlike the brain, the mind is non-local characteristic. It is not constrained by time and space variables as gross materials are. The mind is a facilitating principle and function that interfaces with consciousness at one end and brain processes at the other. So this is very simply put in that way, and then you can begin to think about, well, what is going on at this interface? And how can we explain what is going on in my mind right now? The mind and the awareness in the mind is connected to the pure consciousness, and therefore that is also connected to in a sense to the brain, and because they are of the same matter, but mind is much more subtler, and then brain processes which are going on is affecting in its gross forms, it is affecting the subtle matter of the mind. Okay, so number 6, consciousness in the human context is consciousness embodied, which we talked about just now, and appears circumscribed. So it is like consciousness has been kind of locked up into this kind of body-mind intellect instrument. But that is not strictly true. What we have said is the consciousness is reflected in the mind or the intellect, and then it is sentiency which is then transmitted right down to the body. And it is conditioned, it is clouded by the vortex of forces generated by the mind-body connection. Okay, so just try to understand the various elements of this now. Okay, so when we talk about consciousness in the human context, embodied context, consciousness can be said to be embodied, but really speaking, it is not embodied. It is embodied in a different form, as a reflection, not as a pure consciousness as such. And it appears as if it's kind of locked up inside the body-mind intellect. And it then appears as if it is conditioned. It appears it is clouded by the vortex of forces generated by the mind-body connection. But through our sadhana, this cloudiness begins to disappear, the conditioning begins to disappear, and we see the embodied reflection of the consciousness in a very pure sense of I amness awareness. And that is our pathway and the portal to pure consciousness. Okay? And consequently, the conditioned person becomes an isolated instrument of individual thought, passion and action, desire and action, and therefore this is the human condition now, where the connection between the individual and the totality has disappeared because of this cloudiness in the mind, because of this vortex of forces which are going on, the conditioning which now makes me to think I am limited within this body. and everything which is me is this body, mind, intellect. And therefore I become this isolated individual, conditioned and individualized in my thought, passion and action. So number 7, from the individuation arises, on the other hand, subjectivity, rational thinking, relativity of truth and values. On the other hand, there arises the ego as the organizing principle. So what it means is that in my individual experience, there is something called subjectivity. I am the subject. And this subject is now doing things, okay? It is doing rational thinking. It has got some truth, which is then it is thinking this is the truth, and it is following some values, making some choices, and doing some actions. At the same time, these experiences are going on in the body, mind, intellect, sensations in the body, emotions in the mind, and thoughts in the intellect. All this is going on. And there is something which begins to own all these experiences. What is that? What is the Sanskrit word for that?
Ahankara.
Very good. Ahankara is the organizing ego principle which takes all this experience in the body, mind, intellect and says, I am the owner of this particular thing. And therefore it becomes the akara of aham. This is what is called the ego from this perspective. Then, number 8, with the ego, as soon as the ego develops, now consciousness has been embodied, and that kind of way of embodiment is now clouding the mind. There's a vortex of forces going on. This is me, because it doesn't know anything else. And with this, now, the ego, with the ego comes attachment and craving. Because when I say, I am feeling hungry, I want this, I want that, I'm saying this, I want this. So this attachment is then to the objects of our craving. Whatever object I crave for, whatever object is there, and I say to myself, I want, we become attached to that object when we obtain it, and when we lose that object, we begin to suffer. So attachment and aversion, and then ownership and doership and enjoyership all begins to arise because of the ego formation. And this in turn leads to anxiety, insecurity, stress, distress, disease, consequent suffering, and also, of course, moments of pleasure and joy as well. We should not forget that. But really, then we are talking about all these negative things. Now, situated in such an existential predicament of ignorance and suffering, the goal of the person is self-realization. Existential predicament of ignorance and suffering. So as soon as I come into existence, all my problems will start. And even if I get out of existence, the problems don't end there. Because if I carry the burden of my problems, they will go into the next life. There is a carry forward process, and therefore that is not the end of suffering. So existential predicament of ignorance and suffering, as soon as I come into existence in this human form, all these things begin to take place. I forget who I truly am, and then through that kind of amnesia, the birth amnesia which takes place when I take the next birth, that amnesia does not allow me to remember not only on my past lives, but also that I'm not who I think I am. So that it complicates the situation, and this is our predicament, and in this ignorance I begin to suffer, and therefore the goal is what? The goal is I need to get away from this suffering, relieve myself from this suffering, and the solution which is given is self-realization. So think about the Bhagavad Gita. The suffering of Arjun Vishada, is the problem, existential problem. Jiva Vishada is the problem. Yes? Of attachment, of craving, distress, and Arjuna is very distressed in the middle of the battlefield, and consequently is suffering so much that he begins to tremble and is beginning to now, all kinds of anxiety symptoms and signs are showing up. Bhagwan then gives him the solution. He says, to your Jiva Vishada, I am giving you the solution of Jiva Sadhana. Jiva Sadhana is the solution to Jiva Vishada. And Jiva Sadhana ultimately leads us to self-realization. Okay, so now we started with Indian psychology talking about the Jiva. Now you see it is kind of built up in a narrative way. What is happening at each stage of the Jivahood and ultimately coming to this idea about self-realization. So this is like telling a story about the human being. Okay? The Jiva is talking about the Jiva and the journey of the Jiva. Self-realization, then now going back home, which is self-realization. So the Jiva has come into existence and all these problems have started, and Jiva then has to go out of existence into the transcendental and achieve this state of freedom and liberation, moksha. By a process of what? Process of deconditioning, training, and consequent transformation of the person to achieve higher states of awareness and achievement. So who can tell me what is this process of deconditioning? Let's take the example of Bhagavad Gita. Where does it start from? Deconditioning process.
Purification of the mind through karma yoga and
yes, and then
detachment from the results.
Jnana. That's right. And it starts with the karma yoga, which now stops the karma developing in its track. Then we go to bhakti, which is part and parcel of karma yoga. Our devotion increases, purification taking place again. Jnana yoga teaches me, I'm not this body, mind, intellect. Contemplation, purification. Okay, deconditioning. Then I go to Dhyana yoga. And Dhyana yoga then lifts me into the highest state of awareness, and therefore I achieve this freedom and liberation in my Nirvikalpa Samadhi, chapter number 6. So by the time we reach chapter number 6, we should have realized basically, because we've gone through the whole deconditioning process. So now the next one, this is accomplished by accessing pure consciousness in the transcognitive state. Again, what is the transcognitive state? Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And this Nirvikalpa Samadhi is the most important end point of our transactional life. It is the end point of our journey, and therefore, when we come out of the station called the transcognitive Samadhi, we are into the realm of the transpersonal, which is Brahman. So then, endowed with the consciousness, mind and body, the person is capable of brain processed learning, shravanam, mind generated understanding, mananam, and consciousness access realization. Okay. So because we are conscious beings and because we can understand our experience and because we can understand our suffering and our jivahood, which is jiva vishada, then we can do something about it. And this mananam and the practice of all the spiritual techniques, which is nididhyasanam, going right up to nididhyasanam of dhyana, then we find ourselves releasing ourselves from this individuality and suffering. Yoga is the method of liberation via the realization of transcognitive state. So by yoga, I don't mean just the Ashtanga Yoga, because that is a complete path in itself, but also Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Dhyana Yoga. And that Dhyana Yoga is going to take me to the transcognitive state. Okay, so realization takes different forms relative to the different disposition of the seekers. These include knowledge focused Jnana Yoga to meet the thought needs, devotion filled Bhakti Yoga to deal with one's emotional nature, and the action oriented Karma Yoga for those dominated by the impulse to act. Okay. So depending, again, these are connected to a guna personality. So if the guna personality is rajasic plus tamasic, and it will then go towards action-oriented karma yoga. When there is a bit of subtleness of this kind of emotional intelligence, it begins to go towards devotion plus karma. And then when the mind becomes subtler, then it starts focusing on knowledge with that quietness of the mind, the peacefulness in the mind. Because the sattvic nature is there, then the knowledge focus comes much more easier. And then that disposition, which is our guna personality, will take us along one of this direction and one of these pathways and bring us to Dhyana Yoga. So all ways, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga are leading into the main runway, which is Dhyana Yoga. Okay? So this is how it is going to take place. The wisdom, worship, and work are the three distinct routes for self-realization, and therefore this gives you a kind of narrative understanding of the main principle of Indian psychology and makes it easier for you to remember, whatever is going on. Okay. So, any questions about this?
So this is a phenomenal summary, right, of what we get from Gita and that whole process. However, I just want to make sure, as a spiritual caregiver, we're not trying to take this person through this process.
No, not at all.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, thank you.
Not at all, but not completely so. So, for example, I go to a Hindu patient and he says, "Can you chant the Hanuman Chalisa because I'm a Hanuman Bhakta?" Can you see how now Bhakti Yoga will come in it in a kind of a basic way, so that the care is given to that patient by means of chanting a mantra or chanting the Hanuman Chalisa, whatever they require. In the case of a non-Hindu, again there will be some connection to one of these pathways. And most likely, it is going to be either devotion or Jnana Yoga, because then the spiritual care is given in terms of reflective thinking with the patient, which is really Jnana Yoga, because it's knowledge focused, but it is not my knowledge. It is the knowledge of the patient, which I try to then bring to the surface. Let's have a look at your belief system and see if it's going to help you to kind of come to terms with whatever is going on. Or if I say, okay, there is a way in which your care can be provided, and this is by means of some kind of prayer or some kind of chanting, which can then help you and support you. So there are of course connections, especially if you are the Hindu patient, with any of these things. Okay, and sometimes I remember one patient who was quite learned in this thing, and I said, okay, would you like me to kind of take you through a guided meditation? And he was very happy. He says, okay, yeah, that will be great. So I kind of told him, okay, close your eyes. Now you are lying in bed, just try to kind of sit up a bit, and then close your eyes and just try to relax your body completely, and then keep still. And I'll take you through the guided meditation. So it will come sometime or the other, you will have some connection with any of these kind of 12 steps, as it were. These are the 12 steps of Indian psychology. not the 12 steps of the AA, but 12 steps of Indian psychology, step-by-step process of explaining, descending into Jiva and ascending back to your true nature. This is the journey which is being talked about in these 12 steps, and therefore, it becomes an easier way of understanding and remembering all these 12 steps. Okay. So now we're going to look at the sources of Indian psychology. Let's just start a bit of talking, just to kind of introduce you to the idea. So the original sources of Indian psychology, as we've been talking all along, is really the primary text are the Vedas. And the secondary texts are those which are extracted from the Vedas, as well as those which are then reflected upon and created or contextualized by other people, masters, who then either take the Vedic principle and begin to develop and explore it from that particular perspective. And hence, we have got the 6 darshanas, which are really derivatives of the Vedic knowledge. And therefore, these darshanas represent different visions of the Vedic knowledge. And we got Nyaya, we got Vaisheshika, we got Yoga, we got Sankhya, we got Purva Mimamsa, we got Uttar Mimamsa. Okay, so all this then become ways in which the Vedic sources, the original sources, then have layers and layers and layers of interpretation in various different scriptures and texts. But all of them are connected with the Vedas. And some of these practices could be pre-Vedic. I think I explained that some of these, seals which were found in the coins which were found in the Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, sites. Those have got some people as if they are sitting in meditation. Okay, so it could be pre-Vedic, but certainly that the Vedic knowledge has been talked about as the original source. And the significant speculation on the nature of the mind, consciousness, and the role in human behavior, conduct were made from the times of the Vedas right up to Sri Aurobindo and beyond. Even Puja Gurudev has talked a lot about the nature of the mind and consciousness in that kind of way in which we can understand. Okay? So there is a significant kind of thought process going on about the essential elements of the Vedic thought. And this begins to develop right from the beginning, right up to the present moment, when people are still thinking about how can we explain consciousness. So we can categorize the sources as primary and secondary. So the primary are the Shruti, Vedas and Upanishads, and the Upanishads are actually located in the Vedas. So we can say primary sources are the Shruti, Vedas and Upanishads. Secondary are the Smriti, text with commentaries on these Vedas and Upanishads, philosophical as well as psychological. And then we find that in the Rig Veda, for example, distinction is made between the 2 aspects of the mind, Manas and Chitta, and Manas is the processor and Chitta is the depository of various mental phenomena like thoughts and feelings. So remember in Vedanta we talked about Man, Buddhi, Chit, Ahankar. Now this Chitta is different from Patanjali's Chitta, which has got a different definition. But here the mind is the processor and Chitta is the memory, storehouse of memory. So it stores all the depository, means it's a kind of storehouse of all the mental phenomena like thoughts and feelings. And then Kathopanishad, I think I mentioned, there is a kind of human quest, and it kind of likens it to the chariot. The Atman is the rider of the chariot, sitting at the back, relaxing. Buddhi is a charioteer who is holding the reins. The reins are the mind, Manas, and the senses are the horses drawing the chariot. Okay? So this is chapter number 3, mantra number 3. So this one is a beautiful way of putting the whole contraption. If you take the whole contraption of the chariot, body, mind, intellect, and how it moves and what it is moving by in terms of the charioteer, which is the buddhi in charge of making the chariot go where the Atma is telling it to go. Okay, and therefore it becomes a very nice way of understanding the spiritual journey, the contraption of the body-mind intellect, what needs to be emphasized in terms of the charioteer, because that is the decision-making process which is going to take the chariot this way or that way. Don't let the manas take charge, and don't let the horses take charge of the journey, because it'll go in the wrong direction. Buddhi, according to the Upanishad, is the main kind of element in this contraption of the chariot. Very, very good idea, which I explained to the students here, and they really get fascinated by this whole idea that, Katha Upanishad, 5,000-10,000 years ago, already the conceptualization of the person in this kind of describing it in this chariot analogy, and the human quest, what does it all mean? Very nicely put. So here we got all the Hindu scriptures, and of course there are the Buddhist scriptures and the Jain scriptures as well. But as we know that these are the non-orthodox that are said to be not based on the Vedas, but there are connections there as well. Shruti, Vedas, Rig Veda, Sama Veda, Yajur Veda, Atharva Veda, and Yajur Veda is kind of two parts of it: Krishna Yajur Veda and Shukla Yajur Veda, and then you can see some of the Upanishads which are there, and some of the Brahmanas which are there. So Aitareya, Kaushiki in the Rig Veda, then we got the Sama Veda, Chandogya Upanishad, and then Kena Upanishad is there as well. In the Yajur Veda, we got the Taittiriya Katha Upanishad, Sveteswara, and then Maitrayani Upanishad, Mundaka Upanishad, Mandukya Upanishad, Prashna Upanishad in the Atharva Veda. So you can see where they are located in terms of the Vedas, and these are extracts. Upanishads are actually the extract from the Vedas, and then it becomes a kind of self-contained text, as it were, right? So we have got the Upanishad here, Katha Upanishad, which I'm teaching at the moment. Beautiful text, which is then from the what you call where is it called? In the Yajur Veda, okay? And this is where the chariot analogy is coming from. Now, as far as the Smriti is concerned, we've got the Upavedas, which are Ayurveda, science of health and life, Dhanur Veda, Gandharva Veda, and then Sthapatya Veda. Now, Gandharva Veda is, I think, to do with music and so on. Ayurveda, we all know. Dhanur Veda, I'm not too sure about that, but Puranic, Ityasa, Ramayana, Mahabharata, Bhagavad Gita, Puranas, Mahapuranas, Uppuranas. And then we got the Darshana Shastra, Nyaya, Vaishishka, Sankhya, Yoga, Mimamsa, Vedanta. And then we got the devotional and bhakti text, for example, Narad Bhakti Sutra will fall under that. And then we got the Vedangas, which are then Nirukta, etymology, Vyakarana, Shiksha, Chandas, Jyotisha, and Kalpa. So even Jyotisha is a Vedanga, right? And why these are kind of coming together, as I have explained, Ayurveda and astrology, right? Astrology is not to find out when you're going to win the lottery, okay, which you may want to find out. But really, Jyotisha, as I explained, is an exposition of your prarabdha karma, so that you can begin to prepare yourself in terms of your mind and your response to all these things which are going to happen to you, and see that your journey becomes smoother as you travel through this prarabdha karma. Then we got the agamas, which are based on the on the deities. The Vaishnava texts are there, the Shaiva, the Shakta, and then we got the Dharma Shastra like Manusmriti and so on. So hundreds and hundreds of these texts are there. And each one of them has got a psychological dimension. Okay? So like I just mentioned, Katha Upanishad, The chariot analogy, which I teach in Indian psychology, I think I talked about this as well, becomes a psychological dimension, which I can take out and say, okay, let's look at the psychology of the chariot analogy, and then we can begin to think about the relationship between the various elements of the chariot and the journey of the chariot and the quest of the chariot towards a particular destination. And in this way, we begin to understand the psychological dimension of Kathopanishad. So this then is a vast kind of storehouse of all the scriptures. And, if I say to myself, is one lifetime enough to explore each one of these texts and find the psychological, content of that? It is not going to be. Maybe several lifetimes before we can do that. Now we've got AI, right? So it won't take very long. Okay, so let's stop here for 15 minutes and then we come back again to look at some of the other
One quick
stuff.
question, Ramesh ji. I thought in our Chinmaya readings, Upanishad, that the Bhagavad Gita is considered an Upanishad because it came from God directly. Again,
Yeah.
that's just
Yeah. So Upanishad, according to Madhusudan Saraswati, I think, who wrote the Gita Dhyanam. Somebody can correct me about that. But the Gita Dhyanam, which says, the milk which is drawn from the cow is really the essence of the cow, and therefore Bhagavad Gita is the essence of all the Upanishads, and therefore it is termed as a meta Upanishad. It is the Upanishad of all the Upanishads. And the nectar of the milk which is drawn from there is given to Arjuna, who is the calf and is hungry for that knowledge. Okay? So it is said to be the Upanishad, but in a sense that it is a kind of bringing all the Upanishadic thoughts into the Bhagavad Gita as a practical text of teaching the jiva who is in a state of suffering. Okay? So some of the Kathopanishad mantras are actually in the Bhagavad Gita, word by word. One of them is completely word by word, which means it has been taken, lifted out of the Upanishad and located in the Bhagavad Gita. Okay, let's have a break and then we come back, 15 minutes. So this is now the setup of the scriptures. So as I was saying that there's so many scriptures in various different darshanas. We've got the Vedangas, we've got the Upvedas, Puranic, Darshan Shastra, Agamas, Dharma Shastra. All these are there for us to think about, well, what is the psychology in any one of these? Okay. And I took the Yoga Shastra, which is the yoga tradition, Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, and then I extracted the whole psychological dimension out of that as my thesis. So there is no end to it, and there was this kind of way of, which you are talking about is the Indian knowledge systems and where are they derived from. In fact, there is a vast amount of literature where we can locate, many of these scriptures and psychological dimensions within them. Okay, so now going further, like I was explaining about the Kathopanishad, right? So it is talking about so here's the chariot analogy now. So central role of the buddhi in our quest for liberation. And here, the Taittiriya Upanishad depicts the person as encased in the 5 sheets. So this is where the Panchakosha model comes from. The Panchakosha model comes from the Taittiriya Upanishad, and it describes each one of these koshas, what it is, and in relationship to teaching the disciple about, well, you are here, you need to go to the next and the next and the next. And Mandukya Upanishad explains the different states of consciousness, like wakefulness, dream, and deep sleep state. as well as the extraordinary state, simply called the fourth state. It's called Turiya Avastha, characterized by pure, contentless consciousness. Okay? So we can see different, scriptures are giving different things, different ideas about the mind, consciousness, and he's talking about the Panchakosha, the makeup of the individual in terms of the 5 sheets. So these are examples of psychological elements coming out of the scriptures, and I have named the scripture and I've told you what it is talking about here, and so on and so on and so on and so on. All the scriptures, whichever one you pick up, will have some aspect of understanding the mind, body, behavior, or whatever it is in terms of psychological dimension. So, for example, Amrita Bindu Upanishad, in the first mantra, it is talking about mind is either pure or it is impure. Okay, there are only 2 types of mind, and the mind which is pure is capable of reaching realization, whereas the mind which is impure will remain in bondage. So right at the very beginning, it is kind of taking us in understanding the mind for the purpose of reaching the final destination, which is moksha. And therefore, mind is always there in all the scriptures, one way or the other. Consciousness is always there in terms of, the 4th state of Turiya Avastha, and therefore psychology is necessarily there. And in this way, we can begin to understand it, right? So this is the Kathopanishad, chapter number 3, section number 3, mantra number 3, and this is the chariot now. So you can see consciousness, Atma, is just sitting, relaxing at the back. But of course, this is not to be taken literally, right? Because Atma is not confined in the body. As I was saying, that Atma is Brahman, and Brahman means all pervading. So it is also pervading this body, mind, intellect, but in a different way. And then the higher intellect, Buddhi, is there, then the mind is there, and the 5 horses are there, representing the 5 different senses. Starting with the tongue is depicted, the hand touch and the smell, the ear is there for sound, and the eye is there for vision. And then these are the 2 verses which are related to there, number 3 and number 4. So Rathin Vidhi Sharira Rathameva Tu Atmanam Rathinam Vidhi Sharira Rathameva Tu, which says, know the individual. Self as the master of the chariot, and the body as the chariot. Know the intellect as a charioteer, and the mind as verily the bridle, the reins given to the rider to driver to control. And then in the second one, they call the organs, senses, the horses. Okay, so these are the horses, which then are the sense organs having been imagined as the horses. Know the sense object as the roads. Sense objects are the roads, which is what the horses are seeing, and seeing the roads and seeing everything around them. So these are the sense objects. The discriminating people call the self the enjoyer when it is associated with the body, organs, and the mind. So now the self is the enjoyer. Atma sitting at the back is enjoying the journey as long as it is going in the right direction. Well, not really so, but Atman is there as the enjoyer. And then the Buddhi is the charioteer, the mind is the reins, and then the horses are the senses. So a nice, very nice depiction of the individual, the body, the sharira. Okay, so sharira is the whole contraption of the chariot, individual. So this is one way of understanding the individual. Here's the Panchakosha model, and these are the 5 koshas here shown as Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha. This is actually the wrong way around. And this I picked up from the internet, but it is showing it the wrong way around. The red one should be the Anandamaya Kosha, because it's more pervasive, right? So the grosser part is in the center, and then the other kind of start expanding because there are more subtler and subtler and subtler. But in any case, this you can kind of think about as a representation of the Panchakosha model. Annamaya Kosha, physical body; Pranamaya Kosha, the energy body; Manomaya Kosha, emotional body; Vijnanamaya Kosha, wisdom body; and then Anandamaya Kosha, bliss body. Slightly kind of thinking that this is a Western conceptualization of the koshas. Anyway, this is a personality model, right? So Panchakosha then kind of combining with the dosha model, combining with the guna model, gives you Prakriti as a personality. And then the Panchakosha model, we can see the Annamaya Kosha characteristic is inertia, Pranamaya is movement, Manomaya is passive knowledge, Vijnanamaya is acquisition of the knowledge, Anandamaya is intuition, idea generation, quality given as passivity, activity, knowledge, intellect, ego, etc. So this table, in a sense, don't take this literally again, it's just a way of kind of pointing you in the right direction and say, think about, the qualities of the kosha, each one, what does it represent, and how can we think about it? So this is again a depiction of the individual, the personality, the various functions of the individual, and how they are depicted in terms of the Taittiriya Upanishad, and how when it talks about the Panchakosha. And development of psychological ideas can be found in different darshanas, different system of Indian philosophy. The most prominent among them is yoga, described in the Yoga Sutra, and many consider yoga as a foundation of Indian psychology. Many of the basic concepts behind yoga practice are accepted by other systems, given what the impression yoga psychology is Indian psychology. But certainly, it has its place. Yoga and Patanjali's Yoga Sutra has got a central place in trying to understand Indian psychology. Not necessarily the only thing. It is not completely right to say yoga psychology is Indian psychology, because I've shown you so many different perspectives which come from different directions. From the Upanishad, we just show the chariot model. So it shows that Indian scriptures are so rich in terms of the psychological dimension of the scriptures. However, each one of the major systems like Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Vedanta made significant contributions of their own for understanding human nature, human condition, and human being. And all this is kind of coming together in our thinking about Indian psychology. Okay? So, non-orthodox systems like Buddhism, Jainism also contain many significant psychological ideas. And then when we talk about Indian psychology, we are talking about all this tradition which have originated in India. And for example, Theravada Buddhism originated in Sri Lanka and the Southeast, emphasizes the Pali canon, Tipitaka, and it is a primary scripture. So Buddhism has got its own primary scriptures, right? It is no longer the Vedas, but this Pali canon, which is a whole kind of set of scriptures which are there, and it is called Tipitaka, and it's the primary scriptural source for Buddhist ideas. Focuses on the individual liberation through meditation, monastic life, adherence to the Four Noble Truths, and then Mahayana Buddhism widespread in the East. It goes north towards and the east towards China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, etc. And then this is the Theravada Buddhist tradition, but there are many other traditions, right? So we got the Tibetan Buddhism as well. This one emphasizes compassion. Bodhisattva ideal, as the aspiration to help all sentient beings attain enlightenment. And the key texts are the Mahayana Sutra, the Heart Sutra, the Lotus Sutra, and so on. And the Vajrayana Tantric Buddhism is also there. It is originating in Tibet, Bhutan, that parts of Nepal where it is originating from. Tibetan Buddhism, sometimes it's called as well, and Vajrayana Tantric Buddhism is another kind of tradition within Buddhism itself. It has got its own scriptures as well. Okay? So just like in Hinduism, there are different texts for yoga, Sankhya, different texts for Uttar Mimamsa, Purva Mimamsa, etc. So utilizes this Tantric Buddhism utilizes esoteric practices, rituals, mantras, recitation, very tantric in nature in terms of, the movement and the mudra, the rituals and everything else kind of taking place with the recitation of the mantras. And then Buddhism encompasses a rich array of texts from various traditions, and here are some of the foundational texts. The Pali tradition is suttas and commentaries, which include Dhammapada, which is one of the main texts. And we've got Sammanaphala Sutta, Anapana Sati Sutta, Mahasatipatha Sutta, and so on. They all cover key teachings like the Four Noble Truths and the stories from Buddha's life. Okay, so a variety of sutra literature, suttas and commentaries, which are this, again, a lot of kind of psychology in all of them. Samatha and Vipassana guides based on canonical texts. And then we got the East Asian traditions, sutras. Example include Heart Sutra, Diamond Sutra, Flower Ornament Sutra, and Samadhi Nirmochana Sutra as well. All these are different texts from the East Asian tradition. And then commentaries by exposition by Akwin, Totken, and Koan collection like the Blue Cliff Record. So you can see all this tradition of Koan is coming from the Buddhist tradition, and the Hakku tradition also is included here. And some of the Sanskrit texts, then we got the Pali text, and we also got the Sanskrit text, which then 5 Maitreya texts of Asanga, key text studied today, even works by Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, Chandrakirti, Shantideva, etc. So these are all in Sanskrit. And the Tibetan tradition, comprehensive overviews, treasury of knowledge, the complete Ningama tradition. Ningama tradition also, this is part of the Tibetan tradition, and you can look up some of these texts just to see what they're talking about, right? And give you some familiarity with what they're talking about. And the Lamrim, Stages of the Path by Tsongkhapa, Gampopa, and Jigme Lingpa, these are all Tibetan tradition. So in London, there is a Tibetan center just around the corner from my street, and I used to go there quite often because every Monday they have got meditation and they read the text and all this. Very nice. I mean, just to be kind of familiar with their tradition, kind of makes us to kind of know our tradition better because we can see the differences and so on. So it's worth exploring some of these other traditions as well. So Gondro commentaries and the Patrula Rinpoche, Lutjom Rinpoche, these are the masters who speak about, various different aspects of the Tibetan tradition, Tantric exposition as well, Guhya Karapa and Kunja Gyalpo Tantras as well. These are all different kind of texts which, again, will contain, some psychology in there. Then Buddhist psychology, especially an attempt to understand the nature of transcendence, nirvana, and the methods of attaining nirvana, is this whole kind of pathway, Four Noble Truths, etc., which then become the sadhana through which the Buddhists kind of follow, and especially, the samadhis they talk about is what we today, some of the techniques, Buddhist techniques, one of them is mindfulness. Okay, it is really a small amount of this whole Buddhist tradition. Just like in Yoga Sutra, we got the kind of pratyahar, which is really mindfulness. Pratyahar is mindfulness, but we haven't brought it to the West to tell them here's our version of mindfulness. Anyway, Buddhism proposes a normal consciousness. Psychological processes associated with it are so organized that they generate a sense of stable and enduring ego. So for them, even the individual doesn't exist. It is only because of the machinery that we appear to be having this sense of stable and enduring organized thing going on, and we ascribe that to a kind of enduring ego. What is happening, according to the Buddhist tradition, is moment by moment everything is changing. So even this idea that there's some kind of stability in myself and the sense of my body or my mind or my intellect, that is an illusion, according to them. And if you kind of pull apart this machinery, there is nothing. Okay? So this is an interesting Buddhist concept. This in turn influences and colors, even determines our passions, thoughts, and actions. And this is seen as the cause of manifest suffering. So they talk about suffering coming from this wrong idea that there is an ego and I am that ego. Okay? So that becomes a different pathway of understanding suffering. Whereas we think about, the three types of suffering: Adhyatmic, Adibodhik, and Adidevik. So that is a different conceptualization. Okay, Nation?
Just a really quick question. You said that if you take all of that away, they are saying that there is nothing.
Mhm.
Is that nothing similar to our concept of Brahman?
No.
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 Okay.
When you pull out the machinery, nothing. If you realize that there is nothing beyond the machinery, you are enlightened. But there is
Okay.
nothing. That is why it is called Shunya. Shunya means nothingness. Okay, Shunya
Okay.
means nothing. That means that take it apart. No, this is Shaniksham, Shanikam, and therefore that instantaneous things going on. Step back from it. There is nothing. Okay. So
Okay.
that is the understanding. We don't arrive at fullness. We arrive at emptiness in terms of the Buddhist tradition. In Advaita Vedanta, say Brahman is full. Even if you
Okay.
put something in it, it is full. Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamadachyate, which means that fullness is where you reach. In Buddhism, you reach a state of complete emptiness and stillness.
Okay. Thank you.
So then we have got the person in pursuit of salvation needs to transcend the ego by achieving a transpersonal state where the psychological processes lose their ego reference. So now that transpersonal state in Buddhism is the state of nirvana. But then there is nothing there. The thing is that question is, what is this nothingness? Because if there is that awareness that there is nothing and there is no ego reference, then there must be something. So, there are kind of debates going on about, is there something or is there nothing? And then Buddhism believes that not only in the existence of such a transpersonal egoless state, but also the possibility of attaining by following certain practices. And these are practices which are prescribed in terms of, right thinking, right feeling, right action, right living, and so on and so on. And of course, there is a whole value system based on right thinking, etc. So by describing the different stages involved in the progress from the normal to the transcendental transpersonal state, Buddhism provides us with an interesting and detailed phenomenology of consciousness. So, if you want to learn about phenomenology, go to the Buddhist texts because they describe in minute detail all the aspects of consciousness, because they want to understand really what is going on, which part is kind of changing, and how do I understand the structure of consciousness and the content of consciousness. So Buddhism is very good in terms of the details of psychology there. And then it has some detailed description of consciousness at various different stages of development through the practice of meditation, samadhi. So this is what I meant, is they're very kind of particular about describing the state, so that when you reach that state, you know that you are there. Okay, so this is Buddhism. Vishal?
Hari Om Bhattiji.
Hari Om.
Going back to on the previous comment, and Naishaji's question about nothingness, and as you mentioned about Shunyavad, So I heard, like from Shunyavad, they're coming from that, suffering negative side, as you mentioned, we have that concept of positive, Purna Midam Purna, so, but if I think there is a middle ground, so to say, when Madhyamaka Buddhism, what Dalai Lama and, Tibetan Buddhism. So when they say nothing, it is like in Vedanta, it is no thing, because in Atman Brahman consciousness,
That's right.
it's not
That's
an
right.
object, not an.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what we say, no
That's
thing.
right. Yeah. And this is the thing. The point is that, this is an overall description I'm giving, but what it means is the different tradition, even in Buddhism, talk about this very differently. Okay. So, for example, when the Tantric Tibetan Buddhism, they actually talk about a surviving soul, right? So then that conceptualization is different as to what it is that we are coming to when we say this, after this machinery, there's nothing. So in Vedanta, we talk about beyond the machinery is the Atman, is Brahman. Okay? And therefore, the idea is that when you talk about no thing is nothing, is that there is no thing in that state of consciousness. That is also another interpretation given by some of the traditions as well. So it's a kind of complex theology in terms of all the different traditions of Buddhism as well. Okay, so there we are. This is the end of introduction to Indian thought and psychology. We have managed to cover it in time today, and also that we will continue with the next module, talking more in detail about consciousness and the mind from various different directions, and then see what we make out of that. So we still got some time. If you are feeling a bit overwhelmed by all this knowledge, then I can say, okay, Hari Om, but if not, then we can continue. I need a rest anyway. So if you're okay, we can conclude here with the prayers and then meet up next week. Okay, Komathi?
Hari Om. I have a question on the assignment.
Right.
There are 4, I can go back and check, reading materials given. Can you kind of help me by pointing which article refers to the second assignment of differentiating or looking at in elaborate both yoga and the Vedanta?
Then you'll have to refer to all of them, I think. I can't remember. I'll have to check and then I'll let you know. Yeah?
Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay. Shall we say the prayers? Oh, Nishant is asking something as well.
Very, very quickly, are those posted, those articles, or do we need to go find them? Okay, they're okay. No, thank you.
They are PDFs actually in the classroom, so you can access them. Yeah. Okay. Prayers, please. Closing prayers.
I can.
Oh, go ahead.
Om Dyau Shantirantariksam Shantihi Prithvi Shantirapah Shantiroshadhayah Shantihi Vanaspatayah Shantir Vishwe Devah Shantir Brahma Shantihi Om Sarvam Shantihi Shantireva Shantihi Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om.
Hari Om. Thank you very much. And
Hari Om. Thank you, Padniji.
See you next week. And meanwhile, if there's any question, please post it on the classroom. I'll be checking. And I'll let you know about the assignment.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hari Om.
Thank you, Rameshji.